Are you curious how childhood wounds may show up in toxic jobs? If so, this is the video for you. My name is Marissa Price. I am a Black woman social worker, healer, freelance educator, trauma educator, providing resources, knowledge on this channel specifically for Black women healing, seeking understanding about what has happened to us in these very toxic, traumatic work environments, period, that we find ourselves in, and how we can take our power back to leave, right, on our own terms, on our own timeline, because sometimes it takes a bit to get your strategy together, which I'll talk about today. But to know that a way out is possible and you don't deserve to be harmed, right? So just sitting with that. Welcome to everyone who is joining live. Please say hello in the chat so we can say hello back. If you're watching the replay, please like this video. Please comment below if anything resonates with you. And yeah, thank you for joining if you're here live today. And I saw someone join my membership. Gerald, thank you so much. I do have a whole YouTube membership, y'all, and I just realized this. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll link it in the chat. I have not decided which direction I want to take this in, which is why I haven't really announced it yet. But yes, if you would like to support the channel content that I create, am I a content creator? I don't really identify as a content creator. I'm more of an educator, community facilitator. But if you'd like to support the channel, please feel free to join the membership here. I'll link it in the description after this video as well. Okay, so let's talk about childhood trauma, childhood experiences, and how they may show up in toxic work environments. I do want to say I'm co-hosting the upcoming Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black women with Dr. Kamani of Lifting As We Climb Consulting on YouTube. And we will be providing Black women globally with resources, community, knowledge sharing to be able to make your pivot plan. That is the focus of this year's summit, right? How can you plan what you want your life to look like? And to know that harm, trauma, toxicity is not just the default, right? Even though that's what it's told to us as, right? That we just have to accept being harmed day after day after day. How can you really take back the reins of your life and steer it in the direction that you want it to go in? Because we all have that power, but along the way, right, we are convinced intentionally that we don't, that we're not that powerful, when really, like, the power is in our hands, right? Within these very oppressive systems that we find ourselves in, that we didn't consent to be in, we have so much personal power. And so how can you tap into that to make your pivot strategy, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's going to another job, right, another work environment where you're actually valued, entrepreneurship, freelancing, retiring early, moving abroad, right? All of these options exist to you, but we're told so often that they're off limits to us. So that's what we're going to get into at the Job Liberation Virtual Summit. Again, for Black women, we had over 300 Black women attend last year globally. So we would love for you to join us. I'll put the link in the chat, and it's here on the screen too if you'd like to register. Well, yeah, we also have privacy considerations. If you're worried about being seen on camera, there will be no participant cameras. You can also change your name within the Summit platform if that's of concern for you, because we know that surveillance in these jobs is real, right? Unfortunately. So that is a consideration as well. Yes, y'all. Let me know how you're doing too. I do want to ask that. There's a lot going on. So before we get into the topic for this video, just how are you doing overall? If you'd like to put in the chat or just kind of reflect on that, because we don't often get space to just sit with how are things going? How are you feeling? There's a lot of infuriating, confusing, maddening, right? Efforts to take us back, right? Decades, centuries that we're seeing happening right before our eyes. And it can be a lot. It can be overwhelming. And so to be able to check in with yourself, right? Just to say, like, how am I feeling about all of this? Because again, we don't really get that space all the time, but you can carve that space out for yourself to ask yourself that. Hey, E, good to see you. I'm doing A-okay. Need to make more money though. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And who these systems, right? This is definitely not the topic of the video, but it's like we see them crumbling, right? Capitalism was not created to be a system that lasted for eternity, although that's how it's taught to us. And we're taught that it has lasted. It's been the only system in place in the entire world, right? That's how it's taught to a lot of us. But we're seeing the effects of it, right? It being unsustainable. You cannot continue extracting from the earth, from people, right, forever. There's going to be a point where you kind of reap what you have sown, right? And we're seeing that in real time. So, yes, thank you for sharing that. But yes, childhood wounds, right, can show up in the workplace, especially toxic jobs. So if you found yourself feeling stuck, over explaining yourself, or struggling with confidence at work, those past childhood experiences might be playing a bigger role than you think. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the first thing I have to say is on this topic, abandonment wounds. So jumping right in. If you have experienced abandonment, right, early on, as a child, as an adolescent, how could that be showing up at work, right? Are you struggling with people pleasing? As a child, did you feel, right, a lack of love, care, or attention that could be taken away at any moment? A lot of us may have felt that feeling, right? And so that may lead at work to tolerating things that you know are that you deserve better, right? But you feel like you just have to tolerate it. You may tolerate toxic managers or coworkers just to avoid potential rejection. So that's very real. Yes. Yeah. And I get this. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And I know a lot of us can relate to this. Yeah. Based on our past experiences, it comes from a real place. So just to say that, resisting feelings of self-gaslighting, right? No, these things that I'm dealing with as an adult, they really stem from childhood experiences. And giving yourself that grace and level of compassion and understanding that you're even able to be aware of that, right? Because that's kind of the first step to being able to go in a different direction. I'm aware that these wounds that were made decades back are showing up once again, and they're making me feel like I don't have options. How can I sit with that truth and now tell myself as an adult that I do have the ability to go in a different direction? I do have the ability to pivot if I want to make a strategy to get me in the direction that I want my life to go. That can be a powerful reframe. So you may overwork yourself to prove your worth. If you are struggling with abandonment wounds, right? Again, made early on. And I do have an ebook that includes therapy resources too, if you are interested in 5 steps to begin healing from childhood trauma that I wrote. When was that? Last year in the fall, I think. And here's a link to it. I'll put in the description after this video too. But this is kind of an entry point into unpacking, understanding how those childhood wounds may be showing up now in adulthood, because this is not talked about often enough, right? Once again, living in these systems, we are taught that childhood is a completely different part of life. And we're supposed to cut ourselves off at 18 and just be this new person that is not affected by anything that we've experienced. Right? And we know that that's not accurate or true. You're the same exact person in the same body. You're just older, right? You have more life experience. But that doesn't mean that those wounds go away, because you're still the same person. And so how can you tap back into the parts of yourself that you may have had to hide, right? That you may have had to conceal to stay safe in a toxic or traumatic environment, and now giving yourself permission to be like, I'm bringing those back because it was never me. I was never the problem. That may be helpful. Yes. Okay. And so a healing tip here is to recognize that your job is not your family. Something I've had to sit with, right? You deserve to be in a workplace where you are valued without constantly fighting for approval. That should be given to you automatically. You shouldn't have to fight for it. right? Just by virtue of being who you are, the talents that you bring, the skill set that you bring to the table, you should automatically be valued. You shouldn't have to work, convince someone that you're valuable, that you're worthy, right? If so, that may be a toxic environment that you need to make an exit strategy from. Yeah, yes, overworking myself is something that I haven't done. I do my job and go home. I've never been fired for performance. And that's, listen, I had to take on that attitude towards the end of the job that I was in too. Do the job, right? And log off. That's it. But yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Because that's what you're there to do, right? Just in the job description. Some of us may feel like we have to go above and beyond to overperform, to convince people that we're worthy. And it's really sitting with the fact that you are worthy just as you are. How you came into the job, you were valuable, you were worthy. Sitting with that if you struggle with that. Okay. Other ways childhood wounds may show up in toxic workplaces, anxious attachment style. So I did record an entire webinar that was, I don't think healing covers it. Healing, transformative. Recorded this last year with fellow social worker Angela Kanu, who I had the pleasure of meeting recently. But as two Black women social workers, right, actually bringing this to Black women to be able to touch on our unique lived experiences and how those may show up when it comes to things like attachment wounds. Going a little bit deeper into things like intersectionality, right, how that may impact our attachment styles, systemic issues, right, systemic racism, sexism. How might that show up when it comes to early childhood bonds with caregivers, and how those are impacted by bigger systems like colonialism, right, enslavement. These are issues that we touched upon in the webinar that I hosted with Angela Kanu. So yes, please, if you're interested in that, here's the link in the chat, and I'll also put it in the description after the video. This is so important. Yes. If you weren't valuable, you wouldn't have been hired. Black women, I hope you realize this. Yeah, that's important. Yeah. Why would they have hired you? Right. And again, not putting approval of who you are in someone else's hands. But that's true. You came in with the skills, you came in with the credentials, you met the job, right? The qualifications, you met those already. And so it's a process of kind of like breaking down your self-esteem sometimes once you get in the role. And I have a lot of different like theories, things I've been sitting with, narratives I've been reading about plantation systems, right? Because it really does go that deep. Why are the reasons, right? What are the reasons why there's kind of this drive to break us so often, to break our self-confidence, to break our self-esteem, to make us question the skills that we came into the job with, right? This is a concerted effort. And where does it stem from? The roots are very deep when we think about the foundations, especially of the US. So yes, if you have an anxious attachment style, it may show up as constantly seeking validation at work or feeling uneasy if you don't get immediate feedback. So you may overanalyze emails, in Slack messages, right? Microsoft Teams messages. You may feel on edge if your boss doesn't acknowledge the hard work that you've done. You may stay in unhealthy jobs because leaving feels too uncertain. So a healing tip here is really to start validating yourself. Self-validation is key. Keeping a journal or on your notes app, right, of your wins, reminding yourself that you don't need external approval to be worthy. That comes from within. So many of us are taught to seek approval externally to no end. Just keep seeking, right? What if you turned within to approve of yourself, to validate yourself that you're doing a wonderful job, that you are skilled? There's so much power in that. right? There really is. And again, if you are interested in attending Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black women, early registration pricing ends April 15th. So please register here. It's also in the description section. Yes, we'll be talking about topics like these: reclaiming your self-worth, which is what I'll be talking about, taking your power back, owning your skill set. There are so many other topics, right? Breath work, inner child healing, internal freedom, which Coach Yolanda will be kicking us off on May 16th. Internal freedom first. So how can you turn within to grant yourself freedom? And then everything else will manifest, right? Once you decide internally, this is the pathway that I'm going to be on, this is what I deserve, there's a lot of power in that. So I'm excited about Coach Yolanda's session, May 16th at the Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black women, if you'd like to register. Okay. Like I said, let me know how y'all are doing. There's a lot going on in the world. A lot of grief, trauma, confusion, anger, rightfully so. And so let me know how you're doing. Other ways that childhood wounds may show up in toxic jobs: a harmed sense of discernment. So if you're raised in an environment where your feelings were dismissed often, you may struggle to trust yourself, especially in the workplace. You may second guess toxic behavior, thinking maybe it is me. Maybe they are treating me this way because of something I did, right? You may let gaslighting from managers or coworkers slide. You may feel confused about whether to leave or whether to stay. So a tip here would be, if something feels off, it probably is, trust your intuition, right? Really tune in. What is your body telling you? So often our bodies will give us signals before our minds catch up. What is your body telling you? Are you experiencing insomnia, right? Digestive issues. There's so many physical symptoms, right? Tremors, not wanting to engage in the activities that you normally engage in. These all can be signs, right? That something is off in the workplace. And so with that information, how can you now use that to build a strategy, whatever that looks like for you, right? On your timeline, knowing that your journey will be unique, but sitting in the truth that you're not here to be harmed. You're just not, right? If you were, your body would not respond viscerally to being harmed. So sitting with that truth and letting it guide your path forward, your decision-making process. Fawning or freezing, right? So people-pleasing, fawning, over-accommodating. Fawning is a trauma response where you try to keep the peace by over-accommodating others. So you may take on extra work, even when you're drowning in the work that you already have. You may feel pressure to take on an additional role, which is what happened to me, right? You never say no because you fear disappointing others. Because again, in childhood, what did that mean when you disappointed someone? What were the consequences? What were the ramifications? This is rooted in something that actually happened to you. But it's telling yourself you're no longer in that environment. Now you have agency. Now you have the power to take yourself out of that. Fawning may look like shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. So a healing tip here could be practice saying, let me get back to you, instead of instantly saying yes. I think Glamazini said this on her channel recently, Rashni Cope. I'll link her channel in the chat. Who is also a speaker at the Job Liberation Virtual Summit for Black women. And she will be doing a vision board type exercise session, which I'm excited about. I think it's envisioning your liberation, giving yourself permission to go after your desires. So please subscribe to Rashni's channel here, Glamazini. Right, again, saying, let me get back to you. Let me pause a second to think about it instead of instantly feeling pressure to say yes to everything that comes your way. Start small and then work your way up to stronger and stronger boundaries with bigger and bigger things. But start small and celebrate those wins. You may also freeze, right? So the freeze trauma response happens when you feel powerless in a toxic environment. This may look like shutting down in meetings, avoiding confrontation at all cost, staying stuck, feeling like you're stuck instead of taking action to leave, which we will help you with again at the Job Liberation Virtual Summit coming up May 16th through 18th, right? We will help you with this. If you're feeling stuck, we will help you get that momentum, right? Especially being in community, again, where your face is not shown, where you can change your name to be able to absorb the information that you're receiving from 15 Black women speakers, right? And using that information to make your exit strategy. And we will remind you over and over again that you're not stuck. You have the power to pivot at any time. It's never too late. The moment you recognize you're in a toxic environment, right, is the moment you can begin to make that plan to exit. You have the power to do that. So the first step in healing is awareness. So if you are in freeze mode, start with one small action. Again, starting small to not overwhelm your nervous system, right? Starting small, updating your resume, talking to a mentor, or even just admitting to yourself, I deserve better than this. That can be powerful, right? Just in your journal, just in your notes app, just in your voice notes. I deserve better than this. I deserve better than mistreatment day after day. That can be powerful. Another way that it might show up, and I think this is the last one, yes, childhood bullying. So if you have been bullied as a child, workplace bullying can feel disturbingly familiar. So you may minimize the bullying, thinking maybe I'm overreacting, again, turning within instead of externalizing, which can be a huge part of healing. Externalizing the treatment that you're experiencing and saying to yourself, it's not me. Freeing yourself of that, right? Of constantly picking yourself apart from the inside. No, it's them. It's them. They're the bully, right? They're being triggered. They're treating you this way because of things that have to do with them, not because of you, right? They're triggered by you, but that's not your issue to work through. You may tolerate toxic coworkers because confrontation feels scary. Because again, in childhood, it was scary, right? It did come with consequences. It did come with harm sometimes. So giving yourself that grace and compassion. You may feel isolated and unheard, just like in childhood. But remember, you do not have to endure mistreatment. Document incidents, which Anne-Marie Archer will be talking about at the summit, again, coming up May 16th through 18th. Anne-Marie Archer of the Anti-HR HR Lady, who I had the pleasure of speaking with, as well as Dr. Kamani a few days ago, right? How do you document discrimination in the workplace to potentially negotiate a severance package? Something that I had no idea about when I was in the job that I was in, right? Only coming across the content that she is creating around how to take your power back and make your strategy, right? Make your strategy to exit and know that you don't have to tolerate discrimination. The power is in your hands. Setting firm boundaries and then seeking support inside or outside of your workplace may be helpful as well. So yes, I think that was my list today. But if you are watching on the replay, let me know if any of this resonated with you. Again, I don't think we talk enough about how childhood wounds may impact us in adulthood, period. And then certainly not how they impact us in the workplace, right? The things that we may feel like we have to tolerate, feeling stuck, like you can't leave. These may all be remnants of experiences that you had early on where you couldn't leave. As children, we have very limited agency, right? To be able to leave toxic, traumatic environments. And so that thought pattern, right, has become deeply ingrained in a lot of us that we can't leave. Even though we have the agency as adults now, right, we may still be in that thought pattern. And that's where something like therapy can be very helpful with that process of telling yourself that you do have power, that you do have agency, that you can make your pivot plan, whatever that looks like for you. And just sitting with that truth, sitting with that truth. So again, if you are interested, we would love for you to join us. The Job Liberation Virtual Summit coming up May 16th through 18th. Early registration lasts through April 15th. So please register. We have so many incredible, dynamic speakers who I'm excited to learn from, because I am still on this journey of unpacking what I experienced, what happened to me, of giving myself grace, compassion, all the things that I share. I'm still very much on my own journey of these things. So I'm excited to learn from over 15 Black women speakers, sharing knowledge, resources, game plans, strategy. How did you get from point A to B so that we don't have to start from scratch wherever you are on your journey? I think that's very powerful. And yeah, the link to register is here on the screen. Let me put down the banner. There it is. And also in the description section. So I appreciate y'all joining, those of you who are here live. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you so much. Please comment below if anything resonated. And until next time, y'all. Thank you. Bye.